Welcome everyone to Tales from the 90s, your retro time machine back to my favorite time period, the 1990s. This week we're going farther into the future in the 90s we've ever been. This is episode 67, we're going to July of 1999. Let's go.
Viewer warning. The following program contains material that may be too intense for some viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and more yawns. Play kickball in the street, man those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
It's a cold day outside, but we're going to warm up by talking about some July things. Of course, I randomly pick a month and year that I talk about each time, so you're never seeing the same thing. I think maybe once I did 2 months in a row, but it was, like I said, just randomly. So, you never know what you'll see. I know what you're going to see next week, but I'll let you know at the end. And it's kind of a bittersweet type thing. But anyway, I do want to mention bonus episode just dropped last week. It's just a couple days ago. I rank all of Garth Brooks's 14 studio albums. You can tell by the hat. I don't wear it every day, but sometimes I do. Huge Garth Brooks fan. Coming out with an album of my own, believe it or not. I'm pretty sure. That's good. I can't talk. I'm starting a podcast here. That's nothing new for me, though. But anyway, it should be out the first week of March. As I'm recording this is February 23rd. So it should be out then. Hoping to have everything finished this week. Might do like a live stream where I play the music. Hopefully it comes through the speakers well. But I will be releasing like lyric videos and stuff that'll be on YouTube. And of course, the album will be like, if anybody actually wants to purchase like the digital version or even the CD version, I'll make those. If anybody wants to purchase them, they'll be like $5 plus if you're not around here, whatever it costs to ship there. I'm not gonna like overcharge. It's But the easiest way you can support that is just to stream it. It'll be on all major streamers. I know, being from the 90s, I've talked before about, streaming sucks compared to physical media. And it does. But if it's the only way you can get it, or it's the way you prefer to listen to stuff, that's fine, Just have a good speaker system. People that are happy just listening to stuff through their phone annoy me. It's like, at least connect headphones, something. Bluetooth speaker, they're not the best. It's better if you're wired, but apparently it's turtle time. Apparently, a lot of people phones now don't even have phone ports or something, which just sucks. But anyway, that'll be coming out. And I do want to mention the bonus episode that'll be out for March. It'll be on March 14th. It'll be a Saturday, and I'm putting together groups of movies from the 80s and 90s, kids movies, and then taking those groups and then just ranking those instead of like an overall, for instance, kids sports movies. Those were huge. Mighty Ducks, Little Big League, Rookie of the Year. Come on. And then there's, of course, the Disney movies like Lion King. So I'm trying to figure out, still working on that, figuring out lists, ways to categorize movies. But anyway, that's the bonus episode. You're here for right now. You're here to go back to July 1999. And we're going to start with something that was hugely popular at the time. Probably, 99 was probably one of the biggest years in wrestling history. All three companies at that time, WCW, I'm going to say going strong. WWF was going strong. WCW was on the decline. And ECW was in its pay-per-view years, but past the years that everybody thinks of classic ECW. You think classic ECW, you're thinking of like 95, Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, to like 98, when they first got on pay-per-view in 97, of course. But, it's still popular, but it wouldn't be too much longer before they'd go out of business. And WCW was just crap, which I'll talk about them first. July 11th was their WCW Bash at the Beach, from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was the sixth Bash at the Beach, and the first one to use the WCW crappy logo. I don't know which show used it first, but I love that classic WCW logo, especially the purple one, the easy-to-read letters. The new one, you can't even, if you didn't know it was wrestling or even the initials WCW, you look at that logo, you can't tell what it says. You don't even know if it says anything. It looks like some child's drawing. I've heard some vulgar things that it also supposedly looks like, but I won't mention that here. Try to keep it family friendly as much as I can. But yeah, it was crap. And it was a typical a crapple. That's what it was, a crapple. No, it was a typical crappy pay-per-view at the time. Just hear these matches out. Not all of them. I didn't write them all down. Type them all down. But WCW U.S. Champion David Flair, yes, you heard that right, with Ric Flair, Samantha, who I didn't even know who the hell Samantha was until I looked it up, and apparently that was Tori Wilson's first name before she got the name Tori Wilson. I don't know when or why they switched that around. Asia, which was a China ripoff, and Arn Anderson. Anyway, David Flair, the U.S. champion, retained his title, defeating Dean Malenko. Like, yes. I mean, obviously there was outside help, and it wasn't, David Flair wrestling Dean Malenko clean or nothing. But anyway, he'd been given the belt by his father, Ric Flair, who was the WCW president, after he stripped Scott Steiner of the title on Nitro. I think it was like July 5th. He just gave it to him. I mean, I guess in that way, like I said, it's better than him beating Dean Malenko clean and then, realistically beating Scott Steiner for the title, which was never going to happen. A special boxing match with the special guest referee Judge Mills Lane, if everybody remembers him. He had a court show in the 90s and was also he's also a boxing referee, and probably everybody knows him most from Celebrity Deathmatch, the claymation show that was on MTV where they would have celebrities face off against each other. That was some crazy stuff back then. But yeah, he was a special guest referee for this boxing match. Buff Bagwell with his mom, Judy Bagwell. This shows you the time. I believe Vince Russo was booking that. If not, then it was Bischoff, and I'm sorry, because Bischoff is better than that. But if he was booking it, then again, also Kevin Nash was also booking during this time. Well, I don't know if during this time. I can't say that for sure. But I know at some point he was booking. It was just, man, after, pretty much from Starrcade 97, where they screwed up with Sting on, WCW started going and going. But, I mean, from the end, the finger poke of doom and everything, January, I think, 4th of 99, till the end was crap. And I don't even think the finger poke of doom is, like, as bad as people say. It was just a wrestling thing. It was believable because, Hogan and Nash were on teams. Everybody's like, oh, he poked him, and it is the world title, and I get, traditionalists, title shouldn't be won like that. But it's sort of believable. If you got this, like, just put your mind in of a wrestling, put yourself in the mind of a wrestling heel. You're working for, you got this plan, you're getting back with Hogan. If you're Nash, you're getting back with Hogan, Hogan wants the belt, he's the leader. You know what, that's fine, I'm going to give him the belt, even though, in wrestling, the whole point is to get the world title, to be the champion. But maybe they had other plans, to take over WCW once and for all. So anyway, he decides to, Hogan, like, pokes him and he falls down like he's been shot and gets pinned, and then they jump up and hug, Everybody's like, oh, it's the death of wrestling. No, it was the start of it. But there's a lot more bad that happened, including my language, including my English. But anyway, in that stupid boxing match, Buff Bagwell with Judy Bagwell defeated Roddy Piper with Ric Flair. And in the main event, and yet another convoluted match, it was a tag team title, or not tag team title, that would have made sense. It was a tag team match for the WCW World Heavyweight title, okay? So, a singles title being defended in a tag team match. This has happened before. It's not the very first time this has happened, but it's still convoluted. Basically, if someone from the other team pins the champion in the match, they get the title. Well, that's exactly what happened. Macho Man Randy Savage teamed with Sid Vicious, and they were accompanied by Team Madness. This was the time when Macho Man was just, I don't know, not the Macho Man I grew up with. Not the Macho Man people grew up with in the 80s, the original Macho Man, and then the Macho King, and, the Mega Powers. Or then, later on, the one I know the most, the cowboy hat from, the early 90s WWF to, when he came to WCW. Or even the really good run of the NWO Macho Man. No, this was the Macho Madness with all the women, and he was steroided out of his mind and just to me, was just not the same Macho Man. Anyway, he teamed with Sid Vicious to defeat WCW World Heavyweight Champion Kevin Nash and Sting. And of course, like I said, Macho Man won the title. But, of course, the very next night on Nitro, he loses that title to, guess who? Brother! Yeah, Hulk Hogan. And then later on, Hogan would turn face and go back to the red and yellow Hulkamania Hogan. Right, then this is just like not even maybe a half a year, but not a full year after the whole finger poke of doom and they're all bad and NWO for life again stuff, you know. So now Hogan's Hulkamania. WCW. No wonder I wasn't really watching it this time. Anyway, July 18th. Part of this has to do with the story I'm going to tell a little after this. But I'll get into this. It's ECW Heatwave 98. Or not 98, yeah. 98 and 99. No, Heatwave 99 from Dayton, Ohio. This is the 6th event. Spike Dudley and Balls Mahoney defeated ECW World Tag Team Champions, the Dudley Boys. Well, of course, with their entourage, Joel Gertner and Sign Guy Dudley. I'm surprised Big Dick Dudley wasn't there. Yes, that was literally his name, okay? I'm not just saying, oh, he's got a... No, that was his name. Anyway, this match, you know, more important, not important, I guess, but maybe it is important, but more infamous than the match was the promo at the beginning, because the Dudley Boys were famous for coming out and just cutting promos on the crowd, and their opponents too, but just getting the crowd going. But on this night, they were really going. I mean, they're on pay-per-view, so they were cut. Of course, they always cussed, but they didn't bleep it out. And they were saying the most vile things, like especially the female fans. One of the female fans spit in his face. This wasn't part of the show. And there was almost a riot that happened. Like, it was nuts. The thing I was talking about, I'll tell you about later, is part of a whole weekend, or actually a whole week. But it was after we got back from that. I was at my granny's house, and I think this might have been the first and only actual ECW pay-per-view I've ever seen, but she let me order it because I was over there. And I think they were cheap at the time. They were like $15 or $20 for ECW pay-per-view, which I know was a lot more money then, it would have seemed like, but still, it seemed pretty cheap. But anyway, Granny let me bought it, and she sat there and watched it with me. And seeing this and some of the other stuff, she's like, this is the craziest stuff I've ever seen on TV in my life. I was like, I know, Granny. I was secretly sitting there hoping, like, either she'd go to bed, or, not that I didn't want her there, but I was hoping that, like, they wouldn't have women come out and, like, start stripping or anything, because I didn't want to sit there and watch, like, even as a 15-year-old, I think I forgot to mention, I was 15-year-old during this time, and then, getting ready for high school. I was in July, obviously, no school going on, but, you know, I was like, please don't let any, like, scantily clad women come out, or them start stripping, or sometimes they have women making out with it. Like, I don't, my granny, it is the most awkward thing. I don't remember if they actually had any of that. But I was like, either Granny, go to bed, or don't have this while I'm sitting here watching this with her. But anyway, let's see. The main event, RVD with Bill Alfonso and Jerry Lynn, who they were in like a feud, because, you know, RVD had been the ECW TV champion for like over a year. And him and Jerry Lynn always feuded for the title. I believe Jerry eventually... I can't remember if he eventually beat him for it or not. I want to say he did, but RVD might have got injured. I don't remember. Anyway, this was the time when they were having those classic matches, and, you know, Jerry Lynn just couldn't get the job done. And they had, like, a mutual respect. Well, they ended up teaming together. I don't know if there was a reason they teamed. But, of course, they ended up hitting each other accidentally at some point, and Sabu got involved. Anyway, they defeated the Impact players, which Justin Credible and Lance Storm, with Don Marie. And then July 25th, WWF had their Fully Loaded pay-per-view from Buffalo, New York. It was the second pay-per-view named Fully Loaded. The first was done under the In Your House banner, you know, when they used to have the In Your House... you know, if it wasn't one of their big main pay-per-views like King of the Ring, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, Survivor Series, WrestleMania, they would call them In Your House and charge less, and they'd be like 2 hours. But anyway, they did away with that concept back in February, so now each month has its own pay-per-view, because as you could tell, there was pay-per-views coming out the butthole by this time. But anyway, let's see. Jeff Jarrett with Deborah defeated WWF Intercontinental Champion Edge to win the title. And Edge actually defeated him for that title the night before at a house show. I don't know if it was like accidental or they did it to just kind of drum up interest in that match to have on the pay-per-view. I don't know what the reasoning was, but like I said, Edge just won it the night before, so that was I believe that was Edge's first title, and it was a one-night reign. But anyway, still Intercontinental title, and of course everybody knows the career Edge ended up having. The Acolytes defeated WWF Tag Team Champions the Hardy Boys and Michael Hayes in an Acolyte Rules match to win the titles. And an Acolyte Rules match turned out to be a handicap match. But you'd think if it's their rules, then they would have the advantage of the handicap. But no, they're the unadvantaged team, I guess you'd call it. But then again, Michael Hayes was a manager at the time, although he classic, Freebirds, classic wrestler. So it's not like he didn't just some manager like Paul Bearer trying to wrestle. But anyway, you would think that they would have the advantage because it's a handicap match and the match is literally named after their team. But anyway, logic and wrestling don't always go together. They ended up winning the titles from the Hardy Boys, though. D'Lo Brown defeated WWF European Champion Midian to win the title. And of course, Midian famously won the title because he found it in Shane McMahon's bag, and Shane said, "Yeah, you can go ahead and have it." Logic again. I don't know if this is the beginning of the D'Lo Brown European Champion thing or if he'd already done that. But there was a time period when D'Lo Brown was European Champion, and each night he was coming out dressed like he was from a different European country. Like I said, I don't know if it was during this reign or maybe a previous one. It feels like it was something previous because it was 99, although I could be off. I'm off sometimes. From 97 to 99 in wrestling, especially WWF, I sometimes will this happened here, and I'll have it wrong. But anyway, regardless, the D'Lo Brown European Championship run is probably the most memorable just because of the work he did with it. Man, D'Lo Brown and some of those WWF guys that weren't main eventers, they were so entertaining. Like The Godfather, he was one of the most over guys. If you know over in wrestling means, it just means popular. One of the most over guys in the history and never even came nowhere near the main event. But I mean, and the guys like the New Age Outlaws, and just from top to bottom, they were stacked. And, WCW had beat them for a while, but then they turned to crap, and, WWF took advantage, thanks to Stone Cold leading the way. And, I mean, that's why they ended up winning the war, just because they wasn't just, a couple good main stories, like the WCW had with the NWO, where they had the NWO and Cruiserweights, which they barely put emphasis into them. And then the rest, they just didn't care what happened. Everything's involved in NWO. Well, that's all fine until that runs its course, and then what do you got? And you found out WCW had nothing. But anyway, back to the WWF. Let's see here. Big Boss Man defeated WWF Hardcore Champion Al Snow to win the title. And you can know this is a time when almost all titles were changing hands at almost every pay-per-view. There was exceptions, obviously, but, it definitely happened a lot. Triple H with Billy Gunn and Chyna defeated The Rock in a fully loaded leather strap match to receive a WWF title match at SummerSlam. And, of course, that would be hosted, but refereed by Jesse Ventura. And then the main event, WWF Champion Stone Cold Steve Austin defeated The Undertaker in a First Blood match to retain his title. And there was, of course, as with a lot of these main event WWF pay-per-view matches, there were stipulations. If Undertaker would have won, then Austin could never challenge for the title again. Obviously, that didn't happen. What happened was Stone Cold won. And because of that, Vince McMahon was no longer allowed on WWF TV. And from July 1999 until now, we've never seen him on TV again. Obviously, that changes. But at the time, it was a big thing. But the rule in wrestling is none of that stuff's ever ironclad. But another wrestling news before we move on. July 1st, Chris Jericho signed with the WWF. And, of course, he would debut in the whole Y2J thing because the whole Y2K panic was, starting around this, had started around this time because it's the middle of the year, or a little past the middle of the year. They're like, what's going to happen here, and I'll actually, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll get into more of that next week on the next week's episode, more about the Y2K stuff, because it'll be really relevant. That gives you a clue what next week's episode is. But I do want to talk about that, what I was talking about with my granny. And that was watching the Heat Wave, almost said SummerSlam, watching WWF, come on, speak right here, ECW, too many initials, ECW Heat Wave 99 was the end of a week-long trip that I took with my granny and my Aunt Virginia, who was, I believe, her oldest daughter that she'd actually had with the previous husband, not my Papaw Jesse. Yeah, I think it was him, and then my Uncle Paul, which I don't know if I met my Uncle Paul, it was when I was very young and don't remember. Because, of course, my mom's other siblings, Aunt Wilma and Uncle Jesse, not Uncle Jesse, Uncle Dale. I don't have an Uncle Jesse. Anyway, I'm all confused with names and initials and everything. Anyway, they were from Granny and Papaw Jesse. And like I said, and the older, like I said, Aunt Virginia was a lot older, you know, because she came from a previous marriage that my granny had. But anyway, she was a bus driver, I believe. And she's since passed on. But that week she took us to Tennessee. Sorry for all the alerts in the background. She took us to Sparta, Tennessee, where my granny's family is originally from. And I'd been there previously as a little kid, and I embarrassed the crap out of my mom because I don't know if it was the same house or they moved or they fixed things up. But apparently their kitchen floor sloped. So I'd sit there and roll a ball down, and I'd go, wee, it goes down the hill. Like I was, I doubt the family cared, but it was embarrassing the crap out of my mom. It's like, come on, don't act like this. But anyway, it was one of those times I got to stay with my granny for a whole week in the summer. And I've talked about that before many times. Like, that was like the greatest thing ever. Like, to go over there just for the weekend was amazing, but to get a whole week, usually it wasn't longer than a week, because it was, I believe we went, I don't know if it was Monday or something, but it was early in the week until, we came back Sunday, morning, afternoon. So we were gone almost a whole week in Tennessee. And it was so amazing. It's getting to meet her family again, because, like I said, I was young and didn't remember them since that embarrassing episode. But, they were up in the hills in Tennessee. And, like I said, it was so great. I just remember, like, smelling the air there, like, even as a 15-year-old, like, wow, this is like, this don't smell like, even at Granny's house, which is, far enough away from, like, downtown Cincinnati to where it don't, smog hasn't taken over, and all the, the smells of the city, basically, that you get, the pollution and all that stuff. I'm trying to get all environmental. It's just, there's a different smell between country and city living, and even more rural, I hate that word because I can't ever say it, rural, the word, areas within a city, that are like my granny's house. But this was pure country, out, up in the mountains, out in the woods. Like, you can breathe out there. I almost guarantee somebody like with asthma or something could be cured from going there. Maybe I should go there. Developed asthma in the last 3 or 4 years. It sucks. Anyway, back to the story. Yeah, it was just so much fun, I just hang out. And, it wasn't much to do, but still, I would sit there and watch TV and watch my granny just be happy to be with her family, and them just telling stories and me just sitting there listening. I really wish I remembered some of the stories. I was a week, and while I was 15 and all this other stuff going on, so I probably didn't absorb it the way I wish I would have. But one of the best things about it is they actually gave me a tape. It was a Tales from the Crypt tape that they recorded like a marathon on HBO. So of course, me, I was like, they're like, you like scary stuff? This is Tales from the, it's like, I don't know if they were going to give it to me, but they seen like how I reacted to it. They're like, you can take it with you. I was like, yes, Tales from the Crypt. Couldn't wait to bring it home to show my brothers. But yeah, we were going in my grandpa's car. I don't know if I've talked about this before. I remember my grandpa having 2 cars. I know he might have had more, but 2 cars as a kid. The first one was like a brown one of those like 80s. I don't know. It might have been 90s. I don't know. But the squarer looking cars. Not like today with today's rounder cars. But it was brown. But the car that he had that I loved the most, and he got it brand new, was a Chevy Monte Carlo, 1995. It was a red car, and so he worked for GM in the GM plant in Norwood, which is the town I lived the most in as a kid. 2 or 3 different times I lived in that town in different places. But anyway, that was like the big source of income, the GM plant there, and it closed down, and it really like messed people up for a while. A lot of people moved away because they didn't, the plant didn't stay open, they didn't have jobs. But anyway, I believe it was before he retired or after he retired. Or retired. They made him retire because the company was going. So I think he took early retirement. I can't remember, though, because he might have been past retirement age. I don't know. Anyway, I remember he got I believe, if I'm wrong about this, and my mom's watching, correct me, I believe he got these cars either for free or a discount. Or maybe they gave him this as like a severance thing. But anyway, it was brand new. Like, the first and only time I've ever smelled the new car smell. And it had a CD player in it. It was like, and I remember that there was literally a CD that like was about the car, like, instead of like the manual, and you listen to it. But I remember like this car, like the air conditioning got so cold, like in those hot summer months when you just want that cold, like it was the best thing ever. But one of the coolest thing about this car, back to this story actually, because of course my grandpa would pass away a couple years after owning it, and my granny kept the car there. I believe my Uncle Dale ended up with it eventually. I think, unless I'm wrong on that, I don't know for sure, because I know he was a big car guy. But like I said, I could be wrong. But anyway, the car was sitting there at my granny's house, and it was sometimes get used like not too often, because normally if someone came over to take her to the store, they would just take their own car. But anyway, this car was probably a lot newer and better than whatever my Aunt Virginia had. Not that she was poor or anything. I'm just saying, it was newer and like it hadn't gotten used much. My grandpa didn't go many places other than to pick us up a couple times and go to the store and stuff and doctors. But yeah, we rode down in this car, and like it had one of those. It was revolutionary for me at the time. I don't know if it was something new or not, but the back seat would kind of you could fold it down a little bit and actually get into the trunk. So me being like, one of the things that probably a lot of people don't know about me is I have major car sickness. Like, not as much anymore, especially since I ride in the front seat now with my wife. But, back when I was a kid, riding in the back seat, like, I don't know, I developed this horrible car sickness. Like, I never did throw up. There's been a couple times I've been close. But it was mostly just these terrible headaches that would sometimes, like, no matter if we were going somewhere fun or not, it would almost ruin the whole day, because sometimes the headache would stay forever, and I'd feel nauseous for hours. But anyway, laying down in this thing wasn't so bad, and I had my headphones and my Sony Walkman, radio, tape player, so I was good. But anyway, it was such a fun trip, and then come back and watch this, and then, of course, the next day I had to go back home. But during this time, it was we weren't living with Marky Foe, the stepdad from hell. We were living with my other stepdad, Steve, who is the father of my sisters, Emily and Natalie. And I probably haven't talked about him much. I think I've talked about him when Mom left Marky Foe, and he was like, the one that picked us up. So I think I've talked about him briefly before. I'll talk about him again on another time. But yeah, like I was having all kinds of problems, like obeying my mom and Steve and everything, but it wasn't anything like when I had to go home from Granny's when I lived with the stepdad from hell, Marky Foe. I was like just dreading it. It was like, yeah, I was dreading it because I didn't, I always loved being at Granny's house, but it wasn't like I'm gonna go back to this thing where I could get literally a plate broke over my head, punched in the face, made to stay up until 5 in the morning doing laundry when I got school the next day, that type of thing. I didn't have to deal with that anymore. So it was a different type of dread, but never liked leaving Granny's house. But it was such a fun weekend. Sorry if I take forever on these stories. It's just I get to talking and I get to rambling. I started one of these. I'm afraid like one of these days I'm going to be doing talking for like 45 minutes or something, and look up to realize I didn't hit record. I'm just going to be so pissed at myself. Hasn't happened yet, surprisingly. But now I jinxed myself. It's probably going to happen. But there was some sad news during this month. July 16th was the day that JFK Jr. and his wife died in a plane crash that JFK was, almost said flying. That was huge news. Of course, everybody, my parents, grandparents, everything, one of those core memories that everybody knows when JFK was assassinated. And, his son, I believe, I don't know if he was he might have been a politician, but I think he was like, I think he owned like a newspaper too. He was definitely rich, and one of those high society ones. You know, he had not a newspaper. I think it was a magazine. But yeah, it was certainly sad news when that happened. You know, who knows what could have happened? He could have ended up president. Who knows? You know, I don't know anything about his politics. Before you come at me like, oh, you wouldn't want him president, or you know, I try not to talk politics on anything, especially this, and especially current politics. You couldn't pay me to go there on this podcast because half of you'd be gone, and well, I don't know, you might all be gone because I don't care about politics. Like, well, you need to care about politics. Well, here I go. I don't talk about politics, but here I go. In my opinion, there's no point to voting because no matter who gets voted in, everybody's controlled basically by the big businesses. It's, you know, government gets the rap as being the bad guys, but really it's the corporations behind them. Democrat, Republican, even independent, I don't even know if they'd be truly independent. They'd probably lean toward one side. If we ever get a politician that says, you know, I don't care about no parties or anything, these are the things I believe in, these are the things that are going to happen, and then gets elected, gets in office, and does it, that would be like a miracle when it comes to politics. But anyway, that's my political commentary. You know, like I said, it's, you know, you don't know who to trust in politics. You know, I don't know if there's ever been a politician that's completely told the truth. Maybe Honest Dave, I don't know. We need Abraham Lincoln back from the dead. Of course, he was him and JFK were the ones that everybody remembers as good presidents, and of course, assassinated. Can't have that happen. Can't have good presidents. Anyway, we're going to move on to talk about some sports. During this time, of course, baseball is going on about the mid-season point in July. The standing at the end of the month, though, for the National League, the leaders were the Braves, the Astros, who were still in the National League then. Of course, they're in the American League now. And the Diamondbacks. In the American League, it was the Yankees, Indians, and Rangers. And my team, of course, being from Cincinnati, the Reds, we were 2.5 games back in second place. And this was the year the Yankees beat the Braves in the World Series. And the Reds just missed the playoffs. It was the year where we were tied with the New York Mets. Like on the last day of this, you know, the season ended, we ended up tied with them, which forced, you know, there's 162 games in baseball. It forced the 163rd game to be played the very next day. I believe it was played in Cincinnati even. But we lost to the Mets that day, and it might have been 1-0. I think I can't remember exactly, but yeah, we lost the chance to get to the playoffs. They since changed the way they do things because they don't want to make teams have to have that extra day because, you know, they want to get the playoffs started because there's a lot more playoffs they have to have because of more wild card teams, and they don't want to stretch far into November, but also they don't want to make teams have to play another game, you know, after a grueling season. So what they do now is they go on tiebreakers. They go, you know, if you're tied with a team at the end of the year for a spot, they go on first. They go on like head-to-head matchups, you know, for the two teams that are involved, or maybe even three, depending on the circumstances. You know, it could be four, I guess. It could be as many as possible. But anyway, they go on those records, and we kind of got revenge on the Mets this past year, where the Mets, like, it was coming down to the wire. You know, we were, you know, kept going tied with the Mets. They would pull a game ahead. We'd pull a game ahead. Anyway, it ended up on the last day of the season, I believe it was the Reds. If the Reds won, they would be in, or if the Mets lost, we'd be in, even if we lost. Well, what happened that day is the Reds won and the Mets lost, I think. Yeah, I think that's what happened. Yeah. But anyway, we ended up getting in, and everybody was complaining like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I call it the revenge of 1999. The Reds didn't go far, though. We lost in the first round, of course, so not much of a revenge. But anyway, the players of the month for the year were Mark McGwire and Joe Randa. And the pitchers of the month were Randy Johnson and Hideki Irabu. And, of course, like I said, the mid-season was at this time. They had the Home Run Derby and the All-Star Game. It was at Fenway Park in this year. And, of course, that's Boston, one of the classic parks from the early 1900s that still exist. It was during this time they were actually trying to get funds to build a new Fenway Park. They, of course, never did. They ended up building a new Yankee Stadium. But Fenway Park and, what is it? Fenway Park and Wrigley Field, I think, are the two oldest parks. And, of course, Dodger Stadium's old, too. But I think those are the two oldest. But anyway, the Home Run Derby, King Griffey Jr. won. It was his third, I think it was his third and final win. Was it 2000 or 2001? I think the next year is when Griffey came to the Reds. But I think this might have been his last season with the Seattle Mariners. And then for the actual All-Star game, the American League won 4-1. Pedro Martinez was the MVP, the pitcher. And it's funny that he was the pitcher for the Red Sox, and I believe the pitcher for the he was the pitcher for the Red Sox, but he was like the starter for the American League. And I think the starter for the National League was Curt Schilling, who pitched for the Diamondbacks at the time. And it's funny, in 2004, when the Red Sox won the World Series, they were both starting pitchers for that team. But anyway, this game is more memorable for having the all-century team, because it was, about to be the turn of the century. So they had, I think it was like MasterCard was like the sponsor. So they had, people voting for the players that were the best at each position, and they'd come out. And Pete Rose actually was on the thing and won, and they actually allowed him to be there for that finally. But it was an infamous time because Jim Gray, the interviewer, instead of asking him, how's it feel to be back, and just anything like, you want to admit you bet on baseball, and just ambushed him with it, and he got all kinds of crap, and his career was never the same since. And of course, we know Pete Rose was never reinstated until after he died. Hopefully someday he'll get into the freaking Hall of Fame. He's eligible because he's reinstated in baseball, but the voting for the year came and passed and not on there. Bunch of crap. Anyway, some other baseball news. I should say that I should give you the All-Stars for the Reds because, of course, they're my team. Barry Larkin was a starter. Scott Williamson was a pitcher. He actually won Rookie of the Year this year. It's probably his best year ever. And Sean Casey was on the reserves. One of my favorite players of all time. Reds have had some really good first basemen that I've loved. Him and Joey Votto, classic players. But also, on July 15th, Seattle had their first game at Safeco Field, which is now, of course, I think it's called T-Mobile Park. But it's a retractable roof stadium. Before they had the Kingdom, I think it was last episode I was saying that I was talking about the tiles were falling off the ceiling and stuff, and it was either the last episode or the one before, and they had to finish out playing their home games at their opponent's stadiums, being the home team. But they definitely need a new stadium, and like I said, retractable roof, because in Seattle it rains a ton, as everybody knows probably, and they needed a retractable roof stadium, so that way they could still play outside when it was nice, but also they have that cover, so that way there's no rainouts, because you can't just build an outdoor baseball field in Seattle, and I guarantee you we get it, Turtles. I guarantee you end up either rain delay or just rescheduled. But also on July 18th, the 16th perfect game in Major League Baseball was pitched. That was pitched by David Cone from the Yankees. And then before we move on, I do want to give some NASCAR news. Dale Jarrett won the Pepsi 400, which is the night race at Daytona. He drove, of course, the number 88 Ford credit car. And this was actually the season he won his first and only NASCAR championship. And then Jeff Burton won the Jiffy Lube 300 at New Hampshire. He drove the 99 Exide Ford Taurus. And Bobby Labonte won the Pennsylvania 500 at Pocono, driving the number 18 Interstate Batteries Pontiac. Well, that's our sports news. I do want to talk about, because I'd mentioned it before, I was going to enter high school soon. This was a big time of things going on for me. Like I said, I was, I've talked about this before and wondering why I did things. Like, I was out of the abuse of the stepdad. You would think that I would be happy about that, which I was. I wasn't like, oh, I want to go back to him. But I was acting out. Like I said, I still don't understand it. And I told the whole story many times about me skipping school and sitting in the woods when we lived at my granny's house. Well, by this time, we had moved back to Norwood, and obviously not with Marky Foe. We moved to a different place. and becoming friends with new kids in the neighborhood. Because we did miss our friends in the old neighborhood, but we found friends quickly. My brother's more than me, because a lot of the kids around the neighborhood were closer to their age than mine. Like I said, I was going into high school. Josh was, let's see, yeah, Josh was he still in elementary school? He might have been. Yeah, because if he's like 5 years behind me and I was in ninth grade, and of course I failed a grade, so he caught up to me. Although he failed first grade too. We always had a running thing. He's like I didn't fail. I was held back, because in first grade they don't call it failing. They hold you back. It's still, you repeat the grade. But anyway, yeah, I believe he was. If he wasn't in elementary school then, he had just started middle school. Was getting ready to. But anyway, I was getting ready to start high school. But as I would find out, I would only be at high school for a few weeks, because I ended up moving to Indiana with my dad. But that doesn't happen during this time. I'll actually save that. Again, another spoiler for next week. I'll be talking about that next week. But about the whole skipping school thing, it didn't go unpunished, okay? I believe I've probably told before what I had to do, but it was during this time it was actually going on. Okay, so it was the heat of summer. Just kind of set the story here. I skipped school. I'd gotten in trouble. Well, it was beginning of July, I ended up having to go to court, which was downtown, which was bad enough of a punishment for my mom as there is, because she hates driving downtown Cincinnati. So just knowing she had to go downtown to court for that, I was like avoiding her at all costs, because I knew she was mad about that. And the fact that it was a very real possibility that she could get in trouble for what I did. I mean, nowadays, every parent gets in trouble for what their kids do, and the kids barely get anything. But that's kind of just a commentary on today's kids. Trust me, I've lived it as a parent, so I know it's true. But back then, there was still a chance. It was still kind of an in-between period. So there was a chance that the kid would get in trouble, the parent would get in trouble, one or the other, or sometimes both. Luckily, even though it turned out bad for me, luckily it was just me, because I would have felt extremely horrible if my mom would have ended up in jail or had to pay some kind of fine or something because of stupid crap that I did that she had no control over. She couldn't take me by the hand and make sure I go to each class and sit there with me. I mean, if she would have, that would have been embarrassing, and what I would have deserved, actually. That would have been a worse punishment, and exactly what I would have deserved. I'm telling you. But ended up getting, it's juvenile court, so it's not like a normal, you go in for, front of the jury, and it takes 10 years with lawyers and motions and everything. You just go before the judge, and he tells you what's what. I ended up getting a fine, which I had to pay off, and I ended up getting community service. So it was also during this time that I, of course, reconnected with my dad through my Uncle Dan passing. I talked about that before. That was back in May. So I had, just reconnected with him and my grandpa Wally. And, of course, my dad would move back to Indiana, because he was living in Indiana, and actually came back here when my Uncle Dan died, and try to help my grandpa out. But he eventually moved back, and it was during this time my grandpa Wally was still able to mostly take care of himself. So it wasn't like he needed someone there full time at that time. So it was a lot of times it was just him there, and I would go over there, not every weekend, but some weekends. Give myself a break from being a little butthole to my parents, and I'm sure give my mom a break, because my mom was at her wit's end with me, and I don't blame her. This is just one thing, the skipping school, just my attitude and everything else. I'm completely ashamed of that. Like, I don't even make jokes about the way I acted then. It was ridiculous. But like I said, I got community service. So this community service was in like a bad part of downtown Cincinnati. And I had no idea where it was. I was, they said downtown, get on this bus to go here. And, I believe we called him to figure out where it was, because my mom didn't want to take me to downtown anyway, and the probation officer was like, "Don't take him, make him go on the bus." He did it. I was mad at the time. I was like, "You need to take me to this," but then I realized quickly, shut up, you're in enough trouble. So I took the bus to it. I just started taking the bus when I reconnected with my dad. So I was just learning the bus system then, had no clue. Eventually I would know all those routes. I miss riding the bus downtown. Now they got Wi-Fi and chargers for your phone, man. Back then I was with my tape player, and the only thing I required is make sure I had batteries and headphones that weren't like wearing out. You know, those old headphones where the wire would wear out on one side. I have this weird thing. If music's not coming out of both sides, I can't listen to it. It gives me a headache with just one. So I gotta have a working pair of headphones. And if I'm getting them from them dollar store headphones, they last maybe a day. I'm not even joking. But anyway, going to this community service, my first day, take the bus up there, couldn't find it at all, went way past it. Of course, me not asking questions, I should have, like, where's this at, to the bus driver. No, we go way past it, and then finally there's nobody on the bus, and I get into literally the end of the line, and the bus driver's like, where are you getting off at? I told him, that's way back there. So I take the bus back, the same way I came, still couldn't find it. So I was like panicked. I didn't know what to do. So I just literally got on the bus and went up to my grandpa's house, and was telling him what's going on. Of course, he doesn't know much about it, other than what I told him, which I'm sure disappointed him, which kills me. But, and ended up going home. My mom didn't know where I was because, of course, this is before cell phones. And she didn't think to call my grandpa because she didn't think I'd go up there. I was supposed to go to community service. It turns out, the probation officer like, where is he at? And my mom was mad at me. It turns out they gave me another chance. They didn't like call the police and turn me in. They're like, you get back here the next day. We're going to add, I think they added an extra day besides the day I missed onto my sentence. And I was able to actually find it the next day, thankfully. But anyway, that community service consisted of all kinds of stuff, from stuff you think of with like community service, like picking up trash off the side of a road, to some crazy stuff. I remember one, there was one of the Cincinnati public schools was like shutting down, I think, and the power was off in the building, and it's July, so you already know it's going to be hot. We had to go in there and move desks and chairs out. This place had like 4 floors, I think, and we were having to go in there, the power out, so there's no air conditioning. Me and the group of other teenagers that were involved, and that was some freaking hard work. One of the things I remember the most about, just a conversation I had with some of my fellow convicts, not to get like racist or anything, but most of them were black, and it's not like, only black criminals. It's just the area that this was at, that was, there was a few white boys, but they were like, like, what kind of music you listen to? Do you because they were all listening to rap and stuff like that, and of course I've never really listened to that at all, and they're like, white boy, what do you listen to? Or do you listen? You ever heard this song? And I hadn't heard the song. The next song I hadn't heard this song. It's like, oh, you listen to that? You must listen to that stuff like Guns N' Roses, like. I was like, yeah, just, I don't know. Just, I was trying to get beat up because some of these people look tough. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not talking about color of skin. Just, a lot of them weren't in there for skipping school, violent things. It's like, I was scared to death because, you hear all these stories about, probation and community service. It's like, I'm like the white collar criminal, the business caught with a business crime, and I'm all of a sudden in jail. It's like, I can't survive here. If I would have went to juvie or whatever they called it then, I think they call it something in Cincinnati. I can't even remember now. But anyway, if I would have ended up there, I wouldn't have made it. I would have been crying, come and get me, I want to go home. If I was on one of those scared straight things, I'd be like, I'm sorry, I'll change my ways. But anyway, yeah, I just agree. Like, yeah, I listened to Guns N' Roses. Never heard Guns N' Roses in my life at that point. Because I was afraid to say I listened to country music because I know they would all just stopped and died laughing at me. I just know it. But anyway, the most interesting punishment of this community service is we got to go to the Cincinnati Zoo, and I had to shovel elephant poop. That was not fun. You think, oh, you're going to the zoo, it's going to be fun. No, you shovel elephant poop in the July heat for hours on end. And you tell me if you're having a really good time where you're not sweating to death and not about to pass out from the fumes of this elephant poop. But yeah, I totally, that's how I can joke about the stupid skipping in the school. For one, it's just ridiculous, the lengths that I went to and the things I did in the woods, like bringing a whole setup and, like having a whole basic freaking living room in the woods, basically. Besides that, is because I fully paid for this and I deserve to. But anyway, we're going to move on and talk about a couple books here. Goosebumps were still huge at the time. Of course, the original series had ended, but R.L. Stine was still coming out with Give Yourself Goosebumps, which is like a choose your own adventure type book. Love this series of books. I think I'm on the 5th or 6th one now. I just got from the library. Love this series. It's so much fun. Choose your own adventures with Goosebumps. Like, I never heard of this as a kid. Of course, like I said, at the time when it came out, I was like 14, 15. And, I wasn't doing my schoolwork hardly half the time and skipping school, so I wasn't in the library much to see these books, or I would have snatched them up. I probably would have took them to the woods and probably lost them or something. But anyway, they were on number 37 at the time. It's called Escape from Horror House. And you have to deal with like a poltergeist, and you got to make the right decisions to escape the poltergeist, basically. And they also had the Goosebumps 2000 series, because time, if you add 2000 to the end of it, it sounds futuristic. And not just 99. Like, they were doing that in 95. I think they came out with, like, what was it? American Gladiators 2000 or something, like in 1995. But anyway, Goosebumps 2000, number 20 was Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. And this story is sort of like a mix between, like, Dungeons and Dragons and Jumanji. It played like a Dungeons and Dragons, but the characters in the book got stuck in the game, sort of like Jumanji. Just a few more things to talk about before we get out of here. There was a show that debuted in July of 1999 that was, like, really big for me, but probably not for the right reasons. It was MTV Undressed. It had 6 seasons of 223 episodes, but I remember watching this first at my granny's, because we didn't have cable at the time, because we just moved to Norwood. So we hadn't had cable established yet. But this is a show that, even though it was made for like 14 and up, so I think I was the right age range, and it was actually made for teenagers, it still felt like when I was watching it, like it wasn't something I should be watching. Because it was all about sex, basically. Teenagers and relationships and stuff like that. And I think they're supposed to be like my age, type thing, or high school at least. But a lot of topics on there I learned about from this show. Like, I don't know how they got away with this show, but the less said about it, the better. But it was definitely a show that I was watching a lot, and I learned some things from. Probably not for the best, just because it's a TV show. I think they were trying to be sort of educational with it, because I remember them talking about condoms and all that stuff, but, like, I don't know. Like, I don't see anybody's, like, unless they had really progressive parents, anybody's parents actually letting them sit down and watch the show. But anyway, that was pretty much the only thing debuting on TV at the time, because, it's July, the TV season normally doesn't start till September, so anything debuting then is like a mid-season or off-season, or whatever you want to call it, type show. The traditional, TV season goes from September to May, so anything, debuting in July was, like, very few and far between. But kids' meal toys is definitely a topic I like to talk about in here. It's just fun to look back at this stuff. Even as a 15-year-old, you see these commercials all the time for little late. They don't advertise as much as they used to. You don't ever see like McDonald's ads hardly anymore, especially kids ads, and definitely not ads for the toy they're coming out with that month for the Happy Meal. Well, McDonald's had the Inspector Gadget toy, and this was based off the live action movie, which I didn't really care for. Just I love the cartoon, didn't really care for the movie. But these were kind of a cool toy. There was 8 of them, and instead of just different figures like they'd done in the past, the cartoon one, there were actually 8 different parts of, like, the Inspector Gadget. Like, there was, like, an arm that did something, and a leg that did something, and this attachment. So they encourage you to get more Happy Meals, to get all 8 of them, so you can build the complete, like, Inspector Gadget that has all this stuff on it. It's pretty cool. And that movie actually came out this month. Burger King had the Wild Wild West, and these were toys based on that Will Smith movie, featuring action figures and also the sunglasses that were real popular that they wore in the movie. Wendy's had Muppets from Space. Didn't ever watch that movie and didn't care to. The only Muppet thing I care about is Muppet Babies. But These were toys and sticker activity packs from the movies. Hardee's had Jetsons action figures, from the Jetsons classic cartoon series, which had been getting a lot more popularity with the younger kids thanks to Cartoon Network, and that being one of the things that they show on there a lot. A lot of kids probably hadn't seen the Jetsons. I had, but they'd stopped showing them on reruns, and then for a few years, and then they brought it back with Cartoon Network, and it became popular again. Arby's had Dinosaur Adventures Dino Buddies. And there was these 4 dinosaurs, and you could pull like their parts off of them and put them onto other dinosaurs you can get, so you could make all these different weird creations. Sometimes you get those with the kids' meal toys, where you'd get sometimes they wouldn't be dinosaurs, they'd be like different animals. You can make this weird like bird, monkey, fish creature. I don't know, just whatever ones they have with it, you can make parts and mix and match, make your own little weird Frankenstein looking character. And then Subway had The King and I. I'd never seen that movie, but there was figures based off of the movie. Now, I want to take a look at the Nickelodeon lineup. I'm going to be looking at July 30th, and this is a Friday. So see what they got going on Nickelodeon on Fridays. Of course, as always, we start and I'll be looking over here at the screen just so you know. We'll be starting at midnight with, of course, TV Land. Well, TV Land. That's the channel that came later, based off of Nick at Night. Yeah, TV Land is a whole channel of, they're supposed to be all classic. It's basically Nick at Night 24 hours a day. Of course, nowadays I think they even have original programming on it, which is stupid. It should be like, TV Land should be what it was meant for. But anyway, Nick at Night on July 30th of 1999 saw WKRP in Cincinnati. And you think, being from Cincinnati, I would have seen this show, but I've never actually seen this show. And I don't believe WKRP was ever an actual radio or news station or TV station. I know WKRC is. It's Channel 12. But I think it was pretty much a fictional. And like I said, you'd think, being from Cincinnati, I would have known this show, but I never actually watched it. Then we got Laverne and Shirley, Bewitched, one of my wife's favorites. Mary Tyler Moore Show. Looks like we got a Happy Days marathon from 2 to 5. I would have liked that. I love Happy Days. Richie Cunningham, of course. Ron Howard as a teenager. Of course, loved watching him as Opie. And then, if you watched him like during this, you were alive during the time when this came out, you get to watch him grow as a young kid, Opie, to a teenager, and Happy Days. And of course, becomes a beloved director. And then we got WKRP in Cincinnati again, Laverne and Shirley again. And then at 6, we start with Mr. Wizard's World, one of my favorite shows of all time. It's a science show. Definitely a great way to get the day started if you're going to school. I know it was July, but I always had Mr. Wizard's World on at like either 6 or 7, but I remember it mostly at 6. And at 6:30, we got The Busy World of Richard Scarry, a great cartoon. It was originally a Showtime cartoon based on the Richard Scarry books, but I love that cartoon. Then Franklin at 7. I never really watched Franklin. Rocko's Modern Life, a Nicktoon. Love that crazy cartoon. You're on Nickelodeon, Charlie Brown. I didn't care for Charlie Brown. I've talked about that before. I just never cared for Charlie Brown. Then at 8:30, one of the 3 original Nicktoons, Rugrats. Then at 9, even though it's summer, they still have Nick Jr. And we'll start with the cartoon or show, I don't know, Maisie. I've never watched that. Then we got Blue's Clues, of course, classic, the most well-known Nick Jr. show of all time, I believe. Franklin again. Gullah Gullah Island, I love that. Learned so much about the Gullah culture. But still, didn't even know until literally I started this podcast that Gullah Gullah Island, the actual, I can't remember the name of the island, but the actual islands are off of like South Carolina. Like I was thinking they were more over towards like Europe or Jamaica or something. Just not, like, basically off the South Carolina, I said South Carolina Islands, didn't I? The islands off of South Carolina. Like, I didn't realize it was, I don't know if they're part of the United States or just their own entity, but I don't know. But I learned so much about their culture. Obviously not about where they're located, but so much about their culture. And then we got The Busy World of Richard Scarry again. Little Bear, I just watched an episode of this the other day. It's timeless, based on the Maurice Sendak books. Blue's Clues again. Franklin again. Kipper. I never really watched Kipper. And then Nick Jr.'s over at 2. And then we've got from 2 to 5, we got a marathon of Doug, one of the original 3 Nicktoons. Of course, the other one's Ren and Snippy. But It was during this time that Doug was actually, sold to Disney. So it was, appearing as Disney's Doug. But the Doug that everybody knows the most from the 90s is the Nickelodeon version. It changed a lot when it went to Disney. I've talked about this before. But they were showing reruns of this and, couldn't get enough of original Nickelodeon Doug. Oh, and then we got Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Dead Man's Float. I definitely remember that one. That was one of the most well-known one about the monster that was in the water. Like one of those that's just like always talked about. And then we got the Brady Bunch for some reason during 5:30 during the day on Friday, Nickelodeon. I've seen that before on here, but I don't remember actually seeing it on Nickelodeon then. Then at 6 we got All That, the variety show in the vein of a Saturday Night Live or a Mad TV or the original Nickelodeon show. You can't do that on television. Then we got Cat Dog and Nicktoon. I never really cared for Cat Dog. Doug again, Rugrats. And then at 8 we got Cartoon Kablam, which is like a variety cartoon show where they have different shorts. Like there's one called Action League Now. And the announcer keeps saying that, Action League Now. But they had all these different crazy cartoons. I love those type of things. They have shorts. It was hosted by these two little kids. Just, one of the last things I remember watching on Nickelodeon that I really enjoyed. Probably the latest thing that came on there that I liked. Oh Yeah Cartoon. The same with that. The same type of cartoon shorts. And then at 9, we go back to Nick at Night. Looks like we got from 9 until midnight. I don't know if it was the whole night or just until midnight, but we got the Wonder Years, which I didn't really care for that much. But yeah, that's the Nickelodeon lineup on a Friday night. Cartoon Kablam, I remember that being a huge part of Friday night. And I think it was also was on Snick too. But just a couple more things to talk about. A movie that came out this month that really resonated with me, sort of like the undressed thing, was American Pie. That's just one of those movies that's just like core memories. Like, definitely a movie I shouldn't have been watching again. I'm pretty sure I didn't watch it when it first came out. Think maybe Steve like rented it at some point. It's the first time I seen it. But so many classics things. The band camp story, which I can't repeat on here. It's basically a story about these four friends they all have this bet of who's going to lose their virginity first, and this is one of those stories where they find out that there's a lot more things more important than that, and they all the different relationships that come out of that, and then freaking Stifler and Stifler's mom, like there's so many quotables from that movie, and the scene where Jim has the foreign, I think she's a foreign exchange student. Either that or she's just visiting from another country, or maybe she moved there. I don't remember. But Nadia, like, she's in the room and like he's like broadcasting this to his friends, but he doesn't realize that he sent the email to the whole school. So the whole school's watching her like naked on his bed, and then he walks in, and I won't give any more details. I don't want to get banned here off YouTube, but just a classic movie. Of course, American Pie 2 I love also, and American Wedding kind of ties it up. I have a few of the other ones that came out, like then there's like American Pie, The Naked Mile or something, but they're all like loosely in the universe, and there's a couple I haven't even seen yet. I just got on DVD, but the original three, like, it would be cool to see. Did they do an American Reunion, or they were talking about it? I think they were just talking about it. But it'd be funny to see them come out with a new one like these days, like, have them be like parents of like teenagers that are growing up and going off to college, and they have to try to, impart wisdom. I think it would be a really cool concept for a movie. But yeah, American Pie, one of those raunchy teen comedies that really kind of started a whole subgenre of that, even though it had already existed obviously before. The more popular a movie is, the more movies and copycats that you see of it. But probably the last thing to talk about this week is music. Of course, I'd mentioned before, country music fan through and through. My whole album is called Back on 90's Country, where I wrote every song with it trying to sound like it's something that came out in the 90s. I think I've done a good job of that. Like, I've actually got a few of these songs like stuck in my head. It's like the more the more the songs get stuck in my head, I was like, yeah, this is cool, because all the songs that I loved from back then got stuck in my head. So it's like, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's only, I only like it because I made it, but, maybe other people like it. But anyway, as I got sneeze, sorry about that. I had mentioned that I had started around the mid to late 90s, or not 90s, mid to late 98, listening to other music, like, pop music and stuff. And so some of the stuff that'll be in this, I've heard. Like, the number one for 2 weeks, plus 3 weeks back in June for a 5-week total was Jennifer Lopez's If You Had My Love. I believe that might have been her first single, or at least her first number one. Of course, she had become, she was like, was she one of the Fly Girls, I think it was, on the In Living Color, which is like a variety show, where like I think Jim Carrey got his start there too. But, she was there, and then she started acting. I think her first big movie, I think, might have been like Anaconda or something. But she was popular at the time, and then started doing music, and, this was the start of her, like, becoming really popular in pop culture. Bills, Bills, Bills. We all feel that song. But, although the song's not about paying bills, it's about finding somebody to pay her bills for her. Entitled attitude. But anyway, Destiny's Child, of course, that was their first number one and their first single. The Say My Name, I believe, came out either next or the single after that. And of course, that's, they got popular. And thanks to that, we get Beyonce. I'm competing with her in country music now, apparently. Yeah, because she makes country music. I'll just stop there. And it's not just her, and it ain't even about skin color. It's pop music in general that think they're country. I'll leave it at that because, that's a debate, and I know people younger than me be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I like what I like. I don't like what I don't like. You guys can too. It's music at the end of the day. It's everything. Music, TV, everything's subjective. I'm just giving my opinions on it. I'm not saying other people are wrong if they think this. It's just, in my opinion, almost everything out today on country radio is not country. It don't matter what background the person has or whatever. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that one because I'll never win that battle. Number one for a week was Wild Wild West, the theme song to that movie, by Will Smith, Drew Hill, and Kool Moe Dee. I remember that freaking song because it reminded me, like, it sounded almost in my head the same as the Men in Black theme song from a couple years before, which I love Men in Black. I don't think I've ever seen Wild Wild West. And then Genie in the Bottle by Christina Aguilera comes out, and that, like, explodes. It was number one for the final week in July and all of August for a 5-week run. And, I mean, that was the start of her massive career. But still, of course, even though I was listening to other music at the time, I hadn't stopped listening to country music by any means. Number one big song for George Strait, probably his last big song of the 90s, was Write This Down. It was number one for 2 weeks, plus 2 weeks back in June for a 4-week run. And then we get the massive song, one of the biggest songs in country history, Amazed by Lone Star. Probably known as like the quintessential love song ever to come out of country music. I mean, Lone Star had been like a country band, had a few hits, a few number ones, but not really anything like you think superstardom level. But this one got them there, and for a couple of years, they were like appearing everywhere. I mean, this song, Crossover, was a number one pop song. I actually, I hate usually when country stars like Shania Twain or ones like that will make the song sound pop. They take the fiddles and the steel guitar out and all that stuff. I hate when they do that to for the crossover, because, it's on the pop charts, so we need a pop version. But I hate when they do that. But Lone Star, they actually made a pop version of the song that I actually really love, and I think they actually even sang it better in that version. But, so both versions I love. But, that song was massive. It was number one for the last 3 weeks of the month, plus all of August and 1 month of September for a huge 8-week run. And that actually hadn't been done in country, done in pop music all the times. I've talked before about, 12, 13-week runs at number one, and the next song I have just as big of a run. But in country music, this was super rare. In fact, it hadn't been done since 1966. Jack Green, There Goes My Everything, which is a great song. It was number one in 1966 for 8 weeks, and that's the last time that ever happened. And then another bit of music news, Woodstock 99 was taking place this month, and that was like a massive, it was the 30-year anniversary of the original Woodstock, and it had everybody from like Sheryl Crow, I think Limp Bizkit was part of it. I know Kid Rock was. But this was like infamous for it ending early because of like violence and everything else. They just had to end it. Over 200,000 people attended. A bunch of them got injured. Like, it was like crazy because MTV era and everything going on. It was just massive at this time. But yeah, that was a fun episode to talk about here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I didn't go too long on certain topics. The much talked about next week episode I was talking about before, I said everything's random, but it just so happens that next week episode number 68 is the last episode I could possibly do of this decade because it's December of 1999. Sadly, we're coming to the end of the 90s with this episode. I actually haven't done the first month and year of the 90s yet. I haven't done January of 1990. I think I might have done February 1990. But anyway, this is the last one of that. We're episode 68 in, and like I said, it's not the end of the series by any means because, I've still got more months to do. This is the 6th time I've been through 99, so there's still another 6 episodes of this. But at the time, I just, because my birthday's in December, I just turned 16. I was a freshman in high school living in Indiana, with new friends, new interests. Something crazy that went on this month personally, and I'll tell the story how I ended up New Year's Eve. I ended up at my grandpa's house in Price Hill, which is in Cincinnati, visiting because Christmas break. I'll tell you the crazy story about everybody's like you gotta stay up at midnight for New Year's. It's a tradition everybody does. Brand new millennium. I didn't make it till midnight. I fell asleep literally 4 or 5 minutes before the freaking ball dropped on the new millennium. So, unless I live another 1,000 years, I'm not going to get to see a new millennium start ever again because I fell asleep. Nowadays, I can't fall asleep before 5 a.m., it seems. But anyway, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about the end of the 90s and just the end of innocence. I literally wrote a song the other day about Y2K, like, in a humorous way, but also looking how it's like, Y2K, the world didn't end, but my childhood did, basically. That type of thing. And I just so happened to, today come up with what next week's episode is randomly, and it was that. So, I guess it's, it was meant to be. But anyway, that's next week. Hope you guys enjoyed this. You got any comments or suggestions, maybe new topics to add to this, anything you want to add on, having a lot of fun doing it. I'm on episode number 67, and 68's coming next week. Hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you then.
And now, I predict the future. Next week, you'll be in the same time, same place, same station, for another hideous, hateful haul of horror.
Tales from the 90s never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars